My name is John V. Welcome to Chautauqua People. My guest today is Andrew Borba, now in his second year as Artistic Director of the Chautauqua Theater Company, following long-serving Vivian Benish. He is also an Assistant Professor of Theater at the University of California at Irvine. More about that later. He's a native of Tacoma, Washington, and spent his childhood there before earning his bachelor's degree at Brown Cum Laude and an MFA at New York University. He's also had significant roles on the stage, screen, and television. Did you have any mentors, Andrew, during your early years working?
I did. My high school drama teacher, his name was Mike Wilkinson. Really, I was always interested. I was one of those kids who was putting on plays in elementary school with my friends and all of that. But it wasn't until high school, and Wilk, we called him, really taught me the basics of acting, of the theater, things that I use now both as a director and an actor. And then I'd say probably the other person who had the greatest influence on me was Ron Van Loo, who was my acting teacher at NYU in graduate school. He is arguably the foremost acting teacher in the country, and he just retired from Yale this last year. But he was the one who actually I would credit with really sort of making me an actor as opposed to maybe a show-off.
Mm-hmm. Were you a fellow student with Vivian at any time?
I was. We were actually at Brown together, and that's where we first met. And she followed me. I'm a few years older, so she followed me in my tracks to NYU, and so our pedigree was exactly the same in terms of university, and we stayed close friends for years. And as we continued to work together, we became, I would even say, sort of our own artistic partners once we came here. But it was really more about, she was the one person in the world that I trusted to see my work, to criticize my work, and I her. So it was a long-standing but really very fruitful relationship.
Mm-hmm. How did you make your way to Chautauqua?
Through Vivian. When Vivian and Ethan were co-artistic directors, she called me and said, we're trying to build a company that brings in equity actors, union actors, who are also teachers. And she said, we'd like you to come and be in our first production, but also teach the Shakespeare course. And after that, I was directing the Shakespeare plays and teaching and acting, and then after a while, they asked me to be the associate artistic director.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's take a look here at the Chautauqua Theater Company. And I wonder if you could tell me what your responsibilities are there.
Well, as the artistic director, I'm in charge of programming, in charge of casting, the conservatory, as well as helping to bring in the entire company. I don't have as much say over bringing in the physical production people, but that's under my partner, Sarah Claire Corporandi. And for the most part, I am, exactly as my title says, in charge of the artistic direction of the company.
Right. And what is the Chautauqua Conservatory?
We tour the country and go to some of the best grad schools in the country, and we bring in 14 young actors, almost all who are in pursuit of or have just received their MFAs. Sometimes we will go to undergraduate institutions, but those are usually the Juilliards and the Carnegie Mellon University training programs. And we also bring in 5 fellows, 4 designers and 1 directing fellow. So it's a conservatory of 19. And they are the next generation of the great theater actors in this country.
Now, you visit all those schools.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some detail as to how you select and what you look for?
It's a combination. First and foremost, we're looking for talented young actors. But it would be ridiculous for me to say that we only take, that we get all the most talented young actors in the country. So we balance that with the casting needs of the season, and as well as we like to take from the different schools. We don't want to take them all from one school, because one of the greatest benefits to the Chautauqua community, but really to the actors themselves, is the cross-pollination of acting training and acting styles that they bump up against all the time. They're saying, wait a second, we do it this way in school, and you're doing this. So it is the theater is a craft of thievery, and if you're not stealing, you're not doing it well. So a lot of what we do is sort of put them together and have them work together, and they can sort of take from each other. So it's about balance of schools, it's about casting and a role dispersal, but it also in the end, is also about picking the best people we can get.
And what do you do to judge them? Do you make them give you a video or act for you? Or
No, we go. We go to the schools. Occasionally we'll take video submissions. And after a while, like anything else, after a while you get very good at it, I have to say. Mostly what I'm looking for, so if anybody is out there listening to this and is auditioning for us, this is what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm not looking for that polished thing that looks like it is ready to go. What I'm interested in is a connectivity, a talent and an ability to communicate and an ability to relate with other people in the room and a deep ability to imagine. But after a while, I mean, here's how I would say it, that you can pretty quickly tell if people are not very good. There's a much smaller group of people who are all very good, but then you start to push them or test them, and a lot of times in the audition after they've come in and done pieces for us, I will ask them to do the piece again, but I will give them an adjustment. And that tells me a lot about how they might behave in a rehearsal.
What are the numbers? How many applicants for the positions?
We see anywhere between 450 and 600 students.
Goodness.
And we take 14 actors.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah.
And the term actor is used universally?
It is.
Male and female?
It is now, yes.
And look at Charlie Rose, and occasionally actress comes up. I sort of wonder what's going on.
It's a hard habit to break, and the truth of it is that it is fluid. I think some people, I tend to prefer actor because I think there is an equality that is necessary in the work we do, but it is not as offensive as some other sort of gender-specific names in other professions.
Right. Now, how are plays selected for the main stage season?
We that's actually, and there's a little bit of change for that now too. For the most part, the artistic team, and that includes it is mostly myself and Sarah Claire, but we also are we're a very open organization. So a lot of people will pitch us ideas about, wouldn't it be great to do this play? Wouldn't it be great to do that play? And usually we're looking for a balance. We're looking for plays that, unlike a lot of other regional theaters right now, we like big plays. Noises Off is a good example where there are 9 characters in that play, and a lot of theaters can't afford to do those plays right now. And because we have a conservatory, we need plays that have roles for younger actors and roles for older actors so that we can bring in the pros, because we want them working together.
Right, right. Can you tell me a little bit about this current play, Noises Off?
I can. It is arguably the funniest play ever written, and that is not hyperbole. It is, Michael Frayn, the playwright, has built this like a Swiss watch. And what he is, the first act, I'm not giving too much away, but the first act is a rehearsal of a play, so it's a play within a play. And we get to meet all the characters. The second act, the set turns around and you get to see the same play, but from backstage. And not surprisingly, you get to see how most of these relationships are falling apart, and the fact that they're barely keeping the show going on. And then the third act, it turns around again, and you get to see arguably the very last performance of this play, knowing what you know now about what goes on backstage.
Right, right. And where has this play run before?
Almost everywhere.
Okay.
Honestly, it started in England, moved to the West End in the 80s, and then came to Broadway in 1983 or 1984. It has been remounted on Broadway 2 times after that, and a lot of places have done this play, simply because it really is, it's very funny.
Right.
It's just very, very funny, and so well made.
Right.
And that it is not bulletproof by any stretch of the imagination, but it is. It requires a virtuosity from the actors that is nothing if not delightful to watch. I can't tell you how many people have said afterwards, I cannot believe that those actors did all of that. And especially on 2 show days, it's a true workout.
Right, right. And there were several performances on some days. So I went to an afternoon matinee, and then they had an evening performance that day. Now, With this program with students, did many of them have trouble picking it up?
No, surprisingly.
Understanding it.
I was actually concerned about that. Farce is a very particular style of theater, and it's a style of theater that is not as often done now as it used to be.
Right.
And it takes, I was having a conversation today with somebody that you can't really teach somebody to be funny. You either understand it or you don't. But here's the thing that was I think, useful to us is that I got lucky in that we have an amazing collection of actors that get along very well, that are very funny, but they also are, every one of them is rooted in some kind of truth. And that, for me, and I really will go to my grave arguing this, is that that's what makes real comedy. It has to be anchored in truth. As ridiculous as it gets, there has to be something that those people deeply care about. You know, that phrase that that comedy is tragedy with distance.
Right.
There's a sense of you have to play that stuff for real, and all of those actors, you want to see all of them in straight plays and dramas because they are that good.
Right.
Now that said, we took that and accentuated certain characteristics. and put them in this
One last question about your production of Noises Off. How was this unique other than the turntable? Was there anything special about your production?
You know,
Different than the others?
you know, I'd love to say that there was. I don't think there is. It's this particular take on it. I think it's the biggest. It is the biggest show we've ever done at Chautauqua in terms of technically what we've accomplished. The play itself is almost a musical score. So it is in the same way that you would play Beethoven's Ninth in a certain way. It really depends on the musicians that are playing it and the conductor and the makeup of the orchestra itself. And so what is different is that our particular orchestra this time.
And so that, I thought it worked immensely well.
Thank you.
It's a good fit.
Thank you. We really had
Let's
fun.
switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about UC Irvine. What are your responsibilities there?
I teach the graduate actors there. I teach their Shakespeare course, I teach their American Realism course, and their Chekhov course.
And what type of programs are offered in theater at UCI?
Well, we have quite a few. There's a Bachelor of Fine Arts, there's a Bachelor of Arts, and there's a Master of Fine Arts. I'm mostly involved with the Master's program. We take 8 students a year, and it's a 3-year program, and it is it's a true conservatory program. And we train them through voice and movement. It's very structured, and I think it's actually it's quite excellent. But we're really aiming at, in this apprenticeship program, we're really aiming at giving these young actors the tools they're going to need out in the professional world.
Right. Now, what is the Swan Theater?
The New Swan Theater is their summer Shakespeare theater, and of course, I've seen it, but I've never been able to work there.
Really?
Because I've always been here.
Right.
But I'm great friends with, obviously, Eli, who's my colleague at Irvine, who created and runs that. And it's I'm trying to actually, I haven't said this publicly, but I'm trying to steal his idea for the outdoor theater that they've constructed because I think it's genius. It is a small theater of 120 seats that is beautiful and perfect for Shakespeare.
So compare and contrast the Swan and the Bratton.
No, won't do it.
Okay.
Won't do it, I'll get in trouble.
Other than the size, indoor, outdoor?
Outdoor. The Swan's outdoor, and it's very, very intimate.
Okay.
And we are actually hoping to create in the future, a smaller space than the Bratton that we can work more intimately for new plays as well as Shakespeare plays.
Right. Now your fact sheet lists a series of plays in which you've acted and states, he has appeared in small parts in big films and big parts in small films, and has had recurring and guest appearances on over 30 television series. Wow. How is the role of an actor different in each of these venues, stage, film, and television, in 2 hours or less?
Exactly. I was going to say, what's funny about that is so many people have such different perspectives on that. For me, it is a translation of audience. I joke about the fact that it goes from a large medium to small. And in film, you still have to be connected to what you're doing. You have to imagine the circumstances. If we were playing this and you were telling me that you were taking over my company, and it would be very, very small, and I would be able to, on film, internalize a lot more. I wouldn't have to use as much voice as I would need to, and so everything is a little more internal, but the feelings, the intentions all have to be the same as they are on stage. On stage, the instrument needs to play louder, and it needs to play to a broader audience and more immediately. And that is, in the execution, for me, is the biggest difference. If we mess something up when we're shooting a TV show or a film, we say cut, we stop, we do it again. And it's really in these little tiny segments. So as an actor, you have to keep the entire arc of that character and that story alive, even though you might be shooting the death scene 2 weeks and in a different state than the love scene, than the greeting. You have to keep those things in place and calibrate your performance accordingly. On the stage, you have rehearsal. We work bit by bit by bit, so that, and in such a way so that on the night of the performance, you play the entire arc of that character and incorporate the live audience to it. And that, I would say, is the other determining factor, that not just in comedies but in dramas as well, you're breathing with a community while you're playing a role. And that's that is arguably the biggest difference, because as an actor, it's volume controls and stops and starts. Live theater has other people involved with it, and on camera it's really pretty much you and your scene partner.
Right. Now, do you find if we have a stage production and it runs for a period of time, that the delivery changes over productions, or do you go back and tweak it and say, let's do this a little different, let's do that a little different, let's have a rehearsal, or do you try to keep it standardized? That's an alternative question, not a good way to state it.
And I would say that differs show to show and actor to actor, and not to be coy about it, but Noises Off, let's talk about that. It is, because it's a farce, we are fine-tuning it over and over and over again, and each actor is realizing, the timing, if I come in a half second earlier on that, they will understand the scenario a little bit better, and so something like this really benefits from playing it over and over and over again. But it is, like anything else, it's a craft. Mm-hmm. And I always think of it in terms of woodworking, that, if you build a table and the table stands, you've done your job. But the next time you build a table, you're going to try to build it just a little bit better.
Right.
And it still has to stand, but maybe the finish is going to be a little bit better. And so every single show, we are working to make that show and that performance just a little bit better. Even if, for the most part, the first table was fine, the first performance was fine, and that last performance is fine. We are craftspeople, and we continue to work that way.
Right. And do you see a difference then in their productions with students? I don't know, what was it, about 15 runs, 15 deliveries of Noises Off? Do you see a difference from beginning to the end?
No question. Especially with the students, because they are, unlike, the pros have been knocking around for a while and have had a lot of this experience already. And the students, most of these students in their programs their runs of shows are 3 days, 4 days.
Right.
And one of the things, and this is always true, we've extended Noises Off, but even the 2-week runs of our shows here are longer than almost all of the students, and it is something that I think is vitally important, because you get to practice the craft as opposed to rehearse, do it once and move on.
Right, right. Now, let me go back for just a moment, and we spoke about these 3 media, the stage, television, and film, the big screen. When you're preparing students in California, presumably you're going to be preparing students to work in all 3 settings. How do you teach them differently?
That is the question at most of the graduate schools this year. The question. Because all the graduate schools were formed roughly 30 to 40 years ago based on the regional theater system. Film and television was not involved in the equation at all. It now has to be. Because, and I'm a perfect example of that. I trained for the theater. I trained for the classical theater, classical repertory theater. And I started doing film and television both because I was silly enough to fall in love with a woman who lived in Los Angeles, and we wanted to have a family there, so it was time to move down there and start working. And as much as I enjoy, and I really do enjoy both mediums, but it has to be a part of the training right now. Usually, in most schools, at the moment, it is tacked on at the end.
What is it?
The training for the camera.
Got it.
And I do believe that this is true. I think that if there needs to be a base, a real bedrock of the movement and the voice and the training, because it's much easier for a trained actor to learn how to work in front of a camera than it is for an untrained actor to learn how to work on the stage. So it's easier to teach people in those first 2 years what it is to be on stage, and then say, okay, now here's the adaptation for film and television. But I still think, I think we as educators are working on that, and in another, come back to me in 5 years, because I think we will have a clearer plan and a better course of study.
I've got a good memory. You'll be back. If you're at Chautauqua.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so we understand that there's a challenge for each, and then it sounds like the add-on is the film prep. Let's switch gears a little bit here, and I've done some preparation for this, and I've heard that you are confronted with the challenge of teenage drivers back in California. Can you tell me about them in a million words or less?
No. I just got a text yesterday from my wife saying that she had driven on the freeway, the LA freeway, the 405.
Okay.
For those of you who know the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, it is wide, fast, and crazy. And she had driven with him on the freeway for the first time. I learned to drive in Tacoma, Washington. There was a lot of room, and a lot of room to make mistakes.
Right.
And LA is terrifying to teach kids to drive. It's also terrifying to teach two kids to drive at the same time, who are two very different children, with, let us say, two very different skill sets and two very different perspectives on the world. So I wouldn't recommend it, but the carrot of freedom that's at the end of them both getting their licenses, so we don't have to chauffeur them around anymore, is at the moment is worth it.
Okay. And are they making progress?
They are.
How many cars have they wrecked?
None yet. What do you You're invoking this, like some kind of spirit to ruin our cars for something.
I've been through this.
Yeah.
We're now in the 30s, so I can live with that.
So
now,
you know.
let's pick another little question here. You live in Los Angeles, close to your wife's work. Tell me what sort of position she has.
She is the Senior Vice President of Production for original shows and miniseries in HBO.
Okay.
At the moment, one of the things that she is working on and will be finishing in the next year is Game of Thrones. So I was actually made fun of the other day because my hat was from the Game of Thrones, my backpack was from the Game of Thrones, and so we're team Game of Thrones in our house right now.
Okay. And has the family spent much time here at Chautauqua?
They have. We haven't spent an entire summer together, mostly because my wife, as you can imagine, can't take off 3 months with her work schedule. And so what we've done, the kids were 3.5 or 4 when I first came to Chautauqua, so they were not driving yet. But they would come for a couple weeks, and then I would go back, but I wasn't here for the entire summer either. So they would come, and they would come for maybe half the time I was here. If I was working on a show for 5 weeks, they'd come for 2 or 3. And then as I started to spend more time here, most of the time they'll come now for a week and then go back home, and then they'll come for another week and then go back home. And so,
were there any favorite activities when they were younger?
Yes. Well, obviously ice cream.
Okay.
But mostly freedom, because living in Los Angeles, we do not let our kids just go and go ahead and run down the street. And it's not so much a fear of the boogeyman; it's a fear of traffic. It's a fear of too many cars not looking out for kids.
Right.
It's not the neighborhood I grew up in.
Right.
And Chautauqua, the greatest thing about Chautauqua is I remember very clearly when they were 5, we gave them a couple bucks and said, go get ice cream. And they looked at us like we were crazy. And they said, what do you mean? We said, you know where it is, and it's there, and you're fine. And it now has become for them this place that represents autonomy, that represents a real sense of self-determination in a way that they didn't get in, because we almost by necessity have to be helicopter parents in Los Angeles. And the other thing that I'll bring up, which is hilarious. I was just talking with a woman who works for the dance company, and we were in the same apartment complex, and she has a daughter who's the same age, and they were out in one of the parks, Triangle Park actually, and they had a flower fight. They came in, yes, not flowers, but the flour that you bake with.
Ooh.
And all of the kids came back looking like ghosts. And then they came up to us, and I was actually sitting next to this woman, and her daughter came up, and my daughter came up, and they were both covered head to toe with flour. And they said, "Can we go get some more flour?" And both of us kind of looked at each other and went, "Sure." And we gave them a couple bucks, and they ran to the local store. And it just, it really was. It just feels like it's just such a time of sort of freedom and innocence that it's really. It's been wonderful for them.
Mm-hmm. Now let me have a minor little question here, a different tone. It's a substantial commute from Los Angeles to Irvine. You do it several times a week.
Mm-hmm.
How do you spend that time?
This year, it was on the phone working on Chautauqua business. We had a lot of heavy lifting about getting this season up and about changing it and that sort of thing. The good news is that when I'm driving at 7 o'clock in the morning, that it's 10 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast, and so we're able to get a lot of work done that way. When I do have the free time, there's a lot of TED Talks, podcasts, and the occasional book on tape, but it has to be nonfiction, because if I listen to a work of fiction while I'm driving, my imagination gets caught up and my focus gets off of the car in front of me.
Gets lost.
Yeah.
Gets lost.
Yeah.
I got one tough question for you.
Uh-oh. I thought the kid driving was the toughest question.
It was a good one, though, wasn't it?
It was a good question. It's terrifying.
Okay. The crew in the theater asks if you'll be wearing Vivian's pants, particularly the striped ones.
First of all, I couldn't fit into those pants.
Okay.
Figuratively and literally. I also think that there are certain traditions that belong solely to the person who began them, and that maybe we need to retire that tradition to honor Viv.
Okay, to honor them.
Yes, to honor them.
But I wondered if it was a rhetorical question, and not being the theater insider.
No.
And is it a rhetorical question saying what kind of changes can we see down the pike?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I definitely stand on Viv's shoulders. I stand on Becky's shoulders before that, and I stand on Michael's shoulders before that. And there's been I was thinking earlier this year, and I mean this truly, but I also doesn't mean that I won't bring my own take to things, is that I'm a steward. There are people here in the Chautauquan audience who have been here much longer than any of us have been, and probably will be. So we are a steward of the Bratton Theater, of the theater training program here, and I take that very seriously. I think some of the change is very much in line. We've been given a bit of permission from Michael Hill's new agenda that we have been pushing for this for many years, and that is true in terms of programming. It's true in terms of programming beyond the gates. We are hoping to create a Shakespeare program that will go outside the gates and travel to Jamestown and Mayville and Westfield and some of the local communities. I think it's very important that we as artists and what we are blessed with at Chautauqua are able to take this out to the surrounding communities. And to making, as Michael's phrase is, to make the gate a gateway. I take that very seriously.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that all of the programming will be out there. We're also inviting, one of the reasons we're doing this very popular play of Noises Off and Romeo and Juliet later in the season, is we're trying to attract bigger, not necessarily bigger audiences, we want to attract audiences that haven't come to the Bratton before. And that may be outside the gates, but it may be those who are inside the gates who just haven't taken us in because they were opera people or symphony people or dance people.
Right.
So that's where most of the training is. I think I am very, very interested in new work. I think that's where we're leaning and headed, and I also think you can look to see more and more of that new work not only happening here, but that Chautauqua becomes a place where outside writers and directors and actors want to come to workshop their new work because we have not only the facilities but the talent and the time and the space away from the urban centers to nurture that work the way it needs to be nurtured and hasn't been nurtured in the American theater for a long time.
Right.
And then can take it out back into those urban centers,
Right.
into those other theaters.
Right. We're about out of time. Is there anything else we need to discuss?
Oh my God, is there anything else? You've covered the kids driving and where we're headed with the theater. I don't know if there's anything else possible.
Okay.
I can't believe you didn't ask me about my death scene in Taken 3. That's the thing that that I also get a lot of grief for at the theater.
I wanted to ask you about one piece, but it was too particular. We'll bring you back for that.
All right, good. I look forward to it.
This has been great fun, and thank you very much, and do come back.
Thank you so much, John. My pleasure.